When Secretary Kerry first contacted me about this position in February of 2013, he mentioned the problem of the armed group known as the M23. He was clear. Should I take this job, that helping the region end this armed rebellion and the threat posed by this armed group would be my first, if not my primary, priority. Over the course of my first 6 months as Seagull, 3 developments contributed to the military defeat of the M23. First, the DRC government put in place more operationally effective and accountable military officers in the embattled region of North Kivu. In addition, in March 2013, the UN Security Council approved the establishment within MONUSCO of the first regionally led 3,000 troop strong intervention brigade, or IB. With the establishment of IB, the Security Council also expanded MONUSCO's mandate to include the explicit task of neutralizing the threat of armed groups. MONUSCO and the IB provided critical support to the FARDC in the final months of the M23 rebellion, helping to finally turn the tide against the rebel group after more than 15 months of fighting. Finally, most important, outside support to the M23 significantly decreased toward the end of the rebellion. This was in large part the result of American-led, sustained, high-level diplomatic and financial pressure on Rwanda to cease support for the M23. A second development was the political resolution of the M23 rebellion, which came via the Kampala Dialogue, successfully facilitated by Uganda in its role as chair of the regional organization, the International Conference of the Great Lakes Region, or the ICGLR. While the Kampala Dialogue started in December 2012, it lagged for months. This was in part because of the lack of sufficient military pressure on and continued external support to the M23. However, the dialogue gained traction when the M23 was forced to drop its more unrealistic demands in the face of increased military pressure from the FARDC and MONUSCO in late summer 2013. Third, I also believe the eventual success of the Kampala Dialogue was significantly aided by the added participation of 5 international envoys: the UN Special Envoy, the Special Representative, the Secretary General, the Special Representative from the African Union, the Senior Coordinator for the European Union, and me. Prior to September 2013, the international community had not participated in the Kampala Dialogue, or even been allowed in the room during the substantive negotiations. This changed when, during the envoy's first joint trip to the region, we made the decision to travel to Kampala and meet with the DRC and the M23 delegations in an effort to overcome the stalemate in the talks and, frankly, pressure the parties toward an internationally acceptable outcome. The Nairobi declarations of December 2013 were the outgrowth of 5 critical negotiation sessions over the span of 3 months. As of late 2013, the Kampala talks had grown largely moribund as the parties focused their energies on a new stepped-up round of hostilities. It was at this point that this group of 5 international envoys chose to meet in Kampala to press the participants of the dialogue to either conclude with an agreement or perhaps with a recognition that an alternative approach would have to be sought. My staff and I were deeply involved in all 5 of the final negotiation sessions that culminated with the Nairobi Declaration. All the envoys were involved in the first session in September 2013. I personally led or co-led with the excellent UNSRSG Martin Kobler 3 of the subsequent sessions, and in one very protracted session, my senior advisor, Brennan Gilmore, took the lead along with Kobler. One of our top priorities during these sessions was to ensure that whatever agreement came out of the talks, it would break away from the litany of failed agreements in the past that had granted amnesty for all crimes and sought to end the threat of rebel groups by incorporating them wholesale into the DRC military. That recipe has repeatedly failed to bring any lasting stability to the region and served only to sow the seeds for future rebellion. So we were steadfast in our position that peace in the DRC demands justice and the end of impunity for war crimes, crimes against humanity, including sexual and gender-based violence, and the recruitment and use of child soldiers. The 12-month-long Kampala dialogue was successfully concluded in December 2013 when the DRC government and the M23 signed their respective portions of what became known as the Nairobi Declaration. Most importantly, the Nairobi Declarations included provisions for the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration of the M23, accountability for those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity, and excluded the possibility of incorporating all of the M23 into the DRC military. Now let me turn to the second topic. Now some might think that the end of the M23 rebellion would have been a logical place for the Great Lakes Special Envoy approach to conclude. Yet the end of the M23 rebellion did not resolve any of the so-called root causes of the decades-old conflict. It was by all accounts a major step in the right direction for a troubled region, but I was not ready to conclude this work, and the Secretary was not either, and so he asked me to keep going. Secretary Kerry has been a great support in this work and has shown a strong vision for and commitment to the region. We both felt that the combination of positive momentum from the end of the M23 rebellion and the high-level focus on the Great Lakes region by the international community had set up a unique opportunity for more progress toward lasting peace in the Great Lakes region. There have been several instances where Siegel and American-led initiatives relating to the root cause of the conflict took U.S. engagement in the region to a new level. First, I'd say that one of the most important developments during my tenure has been the sustained high-level attention paid to the region by the international community. Too often, the international community, including the United States, has zeroed in on the Great Lakes during times of extreme crisis, only to vacate the region after the slightest sign of progress. What anyone working on the Great Lakes knows is that there is progress being made, but it is often slow and intermittent. It takes decades for the conflict in the eastern DRC. It took decades for the conflict in the eastern DRC to become as entrenched as it is. It will inevitably take years to achieve a stability that is durable. It can be the foundation for long-term development. The slow pace of progress in no way undermines the value of the work done in the region by the host governments and by donors. Rather, it highlights the importance of sustained high-level attention by the international community and the complex nature of the sources of conflict in the region. Now, part of this sustained attention is effective coordination between donors and other interested stakeholders. One of the unexpected highlights of my tenure as Special Envoy has been the exceptional coordination between the international envoys. I remember in June of 2013, my first phone call with then UN Special Envoy Mary Robinson and our initial discussion of possibly doing a joint trip to the region at some point. That first coordinated trip came early in my tenure in September 2013 and quickly set a precedent for joint action by the group of international envoys and created what came to be known as the E-Team. I've already described the E-Team role in the Kampala talks, but our work together went far beyond that. Since that first trip in September 2013, the envoys have communicated with each other nearly every day, if not multiple times a day. This ensures that we are on the same page, have the same and most up-to-date information, and are able to coordinate on messaging, priorities, and travel. I believe that the E-Team's commitment to coordination increases the impact of each envoy and their respective country organization. It also demonstrates a greater collective resolve to the region than has been seen in recent years. I want to also say that the same can be said for our coordination with the UK, France, and many other donor partners, as well as the International Great Lakes Contact Group. With an active UN envoy as part of the ongoing discussions with other international envoys, our coordination has set a platform for consistency in messages at the UN and from the UN Security Council to the region. Now let me turn to a second one, the need to insist on the elimination of the FDLR. In order for the DRC and the region more broadly to fully realize its development potential, The end of all illegal armed groups in the region is an absolute requirement. I've already discussed this morning the end of the M23 rebellion, and there have been some positive steps taken with regard to the Allied Democratic Forces Armed Group, or ADF. Continued efforts must be made to end all illegal armed groups, like the ADF, and groups known as My and others who contribute to a lawless environment. The openings left by conflict are the cracks in a society that simply represent an invitation or an opening for extremism to come in and wreak further havoc. It is in the security interest of the United States to prevent these armed groups from continuing to destabilize the Great Lakes region and to remove the threat posed by ungoverned spaces by returning state authority across the DRC. Accordingly, it was obvious that one of our priorities had to be to end the threat of the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or the FDLR, a group whose members include some of those responsible for the 1994 Rwandan genocide, and a group that has been destabilizing the region and preying upon the people of the eastern DRC for close to 15 years. Beginning in January of 2014 and throughout the last year, I have made the elimination of the FDLR a personal priority in my work. We have clearly been one of the strongest and most consistent voices in favor of solving this problem. There have been multiple efforts to end the threat of the FDLR, and these efforts have succeeded in reducing the group to a fraction of its original size. The FDLR is now estimated to be about 1,400 strong. The group, however, remains a threat to civilians in eastern DRC, and its continuation is a roadblock to increased trust and cooperation between the DRC and Rwanda. Now, in one of the moments I will always remember, I was told back in May that the FDLR are, quote, comfortable, unquote, comfortable in eastern DRC. That is unacceptable. No armed group, especially one with a list of committed atrocities, as long as that of the FDLR, should be comfortable. I share the frustrations of many, including Rwanda, about how long the FDLR has been allowed to sit comfortably in the DRC and even travel within the region, while other armed groups are targeted and militarily forced to demobilize. Ending the threat of the FDLR is not just a DRC responsibility, or even a regional responsibility. It is an international responsibility. We all have a deep interest in assuring accountability for those responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity and acts of genocide. It is therefore an obligation of the DRC government, the region, all African countries, the UN Security Council, and donors to do everything we can to end the threat of this group and bring its leaders to justice, including ensuring that Sylvester Muda-Chamura has his day at the International Criminal Court. We often hear claims from FDR leaders that they represent the interests of refugees, or those who would seek political change in Rwanda. Let me be clear, the FDLR, with its shameful history of horrific violence against the people of Rwanda and the DRC, have absolutely no legitimate claim to participate in a political process or to represent the interests of civilians in the region. In fact, the FDLR's continued existence presents a substantial roadblock to addressing the concerns of legitimate actors pursuing peace and democracy in the region. For more than a year now, the FDLR has repeatedly promised to demobilize, but after a year of largely unjustified waiting and a specific 6-month grace period granted the FDLR, fewer than 400 actually surrendered in 2014. The FDLR has proven that a purely voluntary surrender process will not bring about the end of this group. Now, I want to be clear that the United States strongly supports the ongoing DDRRR process of any and all ex-FDLR members who lay down their weapons. Over the years, thousands of ex-FDLR combatants have safely and successfully returned to Rwanda. I visited the demobilization camp for former FDLR combatants in Mutobo. I talked to these young men. And I was impressed with the program Rwanda runs there to support the return of ex-FDLR. Rwanda has repeatedly shown its willingness and readiness to receive ex-FDLR members at any time, even after military operations are launched. The DDR process remains open to FDLR combatants who lay down their weapons, which we strongly encourage them to do. The moment is now for ending the threat of the FDLR. And the onus is on the DRC government to deliver on its commitment to do so. The government announced the start of operations on January 29, but as of yet, operations have yet to be launched. The only entity that benefits from further delays in military operations is the FDLR. The DRC government owes it to its people to do everything it can to immediately and permanently end the threat of the FDLR. Now let me turn to the third topic. In a country as haunted by former and present conflict as the DRC, achieving stability requires more than just ending conflict. It requires justice and accountability. It is not enough to silence the guns and disarm rebels. There needs to be real accountability for human rights abuses in order for the population not only to return to their communities, but for the people to heal and move on with their lives. Accountability is also necessary to create a strong deterrent against future rebellions and armed groups. This is why we fought so hard to ensure the Nairobi declarations included language on accountability and denied complete amnesty. If the leaders of these rebel groups are never prosecuted for their crimes, what deterrent is it for them not to return to the bush? And what assurance is there for the general population that another rebellion is not just right around the corner? Now, accountability is not easy, especially in a country where the judicial sector is under-resourced and underdeveloped. The ICC has made it clear that they cannot handle all the cases being sent to them, and countries must be ready and willing to seek accountability on their own. Throughout my tenure and in strong partnership with Ambassador Stephen Rapp, we have advocated for the creation of mixed chambers in the DRC, which would create additional courts within the DRC judicial system with both Congolese and international staff, including judges, prosecutors, and support staff. Mixed chambers would increase the capacity of the existing judicial sector and bring in much needed expertise from international jurists. The end goal for the DRC would be comprehensive judicial reform that establishes a credible and self-sustaining judicial system. But this is still a long way off, and it is neither fair nor practical to wait that long to hold perpetrators accountable for crimes being committed now or in recent years. Mixed chambers would provide a solution in the short term and foster a judicial reform in the process. We had hoped that the DRC government would pass legislation establishing mixed chambers during last fall's parliamentary session. We understand now that there is new draft legislation working its way through the executive branch, which is yet to be presented to Parliament, and we strongly encourage the DRC government to move ahead with this draft legislation for Parliament to pass it during the upcoming March session. The United States stands ready to support the establishment of these courts when the appropriate legislation is passed. Now a bit about the refugee issue. Let me turn to the issue of refugees in the Great Lakes region. Along with focusing on ending the threat of the FDLR, the envoys have also been attentive to the need to address the fate of residual refugee populations in the DRC and surrounding countries. Much of this attention has been focused on the population of Rwandan refugees who remain in the DRC and who, in many cases, are tied up with the issue of the FDLR. A key point to reiterate, the FDLR does not represent the interests of Rwandan refugees. Despite an attempt in 2005 to create a political party separate from the armed elements, and despite including elements of traditional leadership of some of the refugees, the FDLR has never been a legitimate representative of refugees. Many of the Rwandan refugees are judged, in fact, to be held hostage by the FDLR. Now, UNHCR has convened semi-regular tripartite commission meetings with the DRC and Rwandan governments. These meetings address the question of Rwandan refugees in the DRC, as well as that of Congolese Tutsi refugees in Rwanda. In October of last year, I led a mission to Geneva with my fellow envoys to discuss these issues at length with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Following these meetings, I was very pleased to see the UNHCR develop plans to begin a new biometric registration of the Rwandan refugee population. UNHCR expects to start the biometric registration of the Rwandan refugee population in the DRC soon, as a first step towards accelerating durable solutions for this caseload. The United States has contributed $1 million above our usual contribution to UNHCR to allow this registration process to begin in the highest priority areas in the Kivu. The registration exercise is an essential step in demonstrating that the international community is focused on the Rwandan refugee population in the DRC and on accelerating repatriation. The last topic I want to discuss in this section has to do with elections and political freedom. It is a critical issue and necessary for peace and development to take root in the Great Lakes region. Timely, credible elections are the cornerstones of democracy and are the key to unlocking the vast potential of this region. Over the next 3 years, several countries in the region are scheduled to hold national elections. Much attention, however, is focused on the future of 4 countries in the Great Lakes region: Burundi, the Republic of Congo, the DRC, and Rwanda. These 4 countries have the opportunity to establish their place among the community of nations who defend democratic ideals and promote the free, fair, and transparent election of its leaders. On the other hand, the possible spillover effect of bad elections or the postponement of national elections in these countries could have regional repercussions, as well as severe consequences for the individual countries themselves. These countries and their leadership can signal to their citizens, the region, and the world their commitment to the future of their countries and the value they place on the electoral process by adhering to their constitutions, including constitutional provisions regarding term limits. I have spoken out about my concerns regarding deviation from the path to peaceful transition of power throughout my tenure as Special Envoy. These national elections, as I just mentioned, are 2015 for Burundi and the Republic of Congo, 2016 in the DRC, and 2017 for Rwanda. The presidents of these countries have the opportunity to safeguard their legacies as the leaders with the vision to ensure their countries are firmly on the path to democratization and to a future that is not scripted by a few. In the United States and Africa, former presidents continue to serve roles as experienced leaders on the national and international stage. We are particularly encouraged by ongoing efforts to pass legislation regarding the future roles of past presidents in the DRC. And with regard to the DRC, in mid-January, people in the DRC took to the streets when it became known that the Parliament was considering mandating the holding of a census prior to election, a step that would have almost surely delayed the electoral process by at least a year, if not more. In the span of a week, we saw the very real potential for crisis in the DRC over elections, as well as the strength of the DRC democracy when its elected officials listen to the people and serve in the best interests of the country. The DRC Senate and National Assembly jointly deliberated over electoral legislation and reached consensus about removing the requirement for a census. The legislation was recently signed by President Kabila and promulgated. When I spoke to the National Assembly president and the foreign minister afterward, I expressed my belief that this decision by the Parliament will go down in DRC democratic and constitutional history, particularly if the electoral cycle moves forward from here in a timely, organized, and transparent manner. Just less than 2 weeks ago, the DRC's National Independent Electoral Commission, or CENI, finally released a comprehensive electoral calendar, something that we have advocated for almost every day since we started this work. Most important, the calendar officially scheduled presidential and national legislative elections on November 27, 2016, thereby reflecting the constitutional mandate to hold presidential elections before President Kabila's current term ends in December 2016. The release of this comprehensive calendar is a welcome and important step in the electoral cycle. The announcement of the presidential elections with the timeline is particularly important in ensuring what the Congolese people expect will be the first peaceful transition of presidential power in their entire history since independence. As to another important country in the region, Burundi. In late May of 2014,